Moment. Any minute now, the Supreme Court will start to hear arguments over this historic question. Is there a constitutional right to same-sex marriage that states cannot deny? This morning, supporters for and against California's Proposition 8 are rallying outside the court. Let's get a baseline. Right now, 9 states and Washington, D.C. allow same-sex marriage. 30 states ban it with a constitutional amendment. 8 more states ban it by statute. This case may or may not have implications for the entire country. Now, if the court upholds Prop 8, each state would be free to make its own decision. They could ban or allow same-sex marriage. If the court strikes it down and rules there is a fundamental right to marriage, those 38 state bans on same-sex marriage could go away. But it gets a little more confusing because the court could also rule that the supporters of this didn't have the standing to appeal it, and then the ruling would only apply to California. Here's a preview of the arguments that are likely to be made inside that courtroom in just a few minutes.
The proponents of Proposition 8 still haven't been able to come up with an argument as to why, for all the good things about marriage, we need to keep people out who want to get married.
Unions of 2 men or 2 women are not the same thing as a marriage between a man and a woman. And only marriage between a man and a woman can connect children to their mother and father and their parents to the children.
This is a critical time for gay rights, a decision with not just legal but moral and religious ramifications. Just in the last 24 hours, 3 more senators have voiced their support for same-sex marriage: Mark Warner, Jay Rockefeller, and Senator Mark Begich. The latest Washington Post ABC News poll shows just how much public opinion has shifted. 58% support legalizing same-sex marriage. I want to bring in Ryan Grimm, Washington bureau chief of the Huffington Post, and Jonathan Allen, senior Washington correspondent at Politico. Good morning.
Good morning.
We've talked about how public attitudes have changed, and you look at the polls and the politicians. But do you have a sense, what do you think, Ryan, why is this all happening now?
You mean why did everything move so quickly? Why is there such a sea change? Yeah. I think actually Karl Rove, ironically, deserves a lot of the credit for it. In 2004, the Republican Party put a bunch of anti-gay marriage initiatives on different state ballots to try to drive out, evangelical voters. And what that did is it took an issue that had not necessarily been partisan before and turned it into a deeply partisan one. So that meant that Democrats now had to decide whether they're against gay marriage, for civil unions, against civil unions. And as soon as you make the Democratic Party decide on a civil rights issue, they're going to shift eventually. It's going to take some time, but they will eventually get there. And so what you saw is that rapidly, over the next several years, the Democratic Party moved in favor of gay marriage. Once gay marriage then became legalized in different states, people went to weddings, people bought gifts, people's relatives and friends started getting married, and they saw that the institution of marriage wasn't any better or worse than it was before this happened, and the sky didn't fall, and now you're seeing the polls surge as a result. And
Jonathan, how much of this do you think is the human factor? And we've heard, for example, Rob Portman did it because of his son, and we've heard even Bill Clinton, of course, talking about the fact that he's had over the fact of what his decisions meant to people who he cares deeply about. Justice Roberts has a lesbian cousin who will be attending today's arguments. How much of this is an emotional shift?
I think there's a serious emotional shift among the public, and really what you've seen is Washington is following the country. As you noted, there's been a huge change in public support for gay marriage. It's up to 58%. Of course, it depends on where you live in a lot of cases as to whether the place you live is a place that has majority support for it. But I think what you're seeing is the political class is much more aware now of friends, family members who are gay or who are supporters of gay marriage, whether or not they're lesbian, gay, or transgender or bisexual. So I think there's just a sort of social movement going on. And look, the Supreme Court historically has taken up issues when they become when it becomes necessary to make a decision because of a sort of cultural shift on the landscape. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to rule in favor of gay marriage, but it's something that they clearly think they need to make some sort of statement on.
And it's we heard yesterday, I think, from the cousin of Justice Roberts, she basically said, I think he will end up doing the right thing. I don't know, Ryan, do you think think that public sentiment is weighing on the justices in this case?
Yes. I mean, the Supreme Court justices, perhaps more than anybody except for presidents, care more about history and legacy than anything else. And they know that this arc bends one direction. This thing is not going backwards. And so let's say that they voted 5-4 and kept gay marriage illegal for another couple years. They know that it's just a matter of time until it's eventually going to bend toward the direction of freedom here. So why would they want their names to be associated with a Supreme Court opinion that years from now would be looked at derisively as bigoted? So they see where this is going. So I don't think that applies to Alito necessarily, or Scalia or Thomas. But Kennedy and Roberts have a big sense of their place in history. So I think you're going to get at least a 6-3 verdict here.
I want to bring in Martha Coakley, Massachusetts Attorney General. She's argued a case in front of the Supreme Court, and she filed briefs in support of same-sex marriage for both today's case with Prop 8 and the Defense of Marriage Act, which will be heard tomorrow. It is good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
In your brief, you write, Prop 8 discriminates against gays and lesbians and their families. Now, if you're talking about just from a legal standpoint, is that the best argument against Prop 8?
It's one of them, certainly, and we know better in Massachusetts, having had same-sex marriage since 2004, challenging DOMA. Those arguments are tomorrow. But our amicus brief points out exactly why it's so unfair not to allow for gay marriage, that the sanctity of marriage, the institution, the rights and responsibilities that help every family, including children, provide the kind of stability that we say is so important in marriage.
You know, it's going to be really interesting for the people who can actually be in there. We've seen people lined up for days who want to be a part of this historic argument. You've been in that courtroom. If you were in there right now, what would you be looking for?
Well, certainly the questions are important to not only to the litigants, but more importantly to each other, what the justices say and comment on. And today's arguments will be very different, I think, from tomorrow's, given the issues. And I think we're confident tomorrow that the judges will be able to say there's no rational basis for a Defense of Marriage Act. There's no reason why, particularly for a state like Massachusetts or New York, which is the case before it, that people shouldn't be treated the same, that families shouldn't be treated the same, federal benefits shouldn't be given to same-sex marriages as they are to opposite-sex marriages. And so the tenor of questions, I think today and tomorrow will be a little bit different, but today will be some clue as to where they are headed on the issue. I do think, though, that, and I'm hopeful that these judges will want to be on the bright side of history. I think that arc is moving only in one direction.
Well, the cover of Time magazine says he's the decider. It's a picture, obviously, of Justice Kennedy. But we know that the Chief Justice, John Roberts, was the deciding vote on health care last year, surprised a lot of people. We've said he has a lesbian cousin who will be in the room. On the other side, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has said the court got too far ahead of public opinion on Roe v. Wade. Do you think that this is a done deal, or are you nervous about this decision?
I think we're going to watch it closely. I think cautiously optimistic is the best way to look at it. I think you can't take Justice Ginsburg's comments too far. I think she was commenting historically what happened after Roe v. Wade, and I do think this is a different decision. I think this says, and you look at anybody under 30, for instance, who can't even understand why this is before the Supreme Court, opposition to this is aging out, and very quickly. It's astounding how quickly public opinion has changed on this, and I think that the justices will understand that this is providing the fairness and dignity to same-sex marriage that doesn't interfere with anybody else's rights in the country. We've shown that in Massachusetts.
For people who are supportive of LGBT rights, is one of these more important than the other, today's or tomorrow's, or are they linked?
Well, I think they are linked in some respects. I think it is more, it's more obvious that DOMA should be struck down, or the court will strike DOMA down. We are hopeful that the court will extend rights in California, at least not set them back. It would be hard for the court to be too far out of public opinion in this instance, given the rate and the type of change that's happening around this fairness issue for same-sex couples. And so I'm confident that ultimately both cases will put us further down the road to marriage. Just how far, I think we'll have to wait to see to the end of June.